Hey, good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're at. Welcome to the show. Welcome to the Leadership Toolkit. My name is Mike Phillips, and I will be your host today. As you know, on this show, we get together, we have conversations with amazing leaders, amazing leadership experts, amazing managers, people that have influence in their workplace and in their community, so that you are able to learn both from their successes, maybe some of their failures, what they're going through. And I am really excited to have excited. I don't know if that's even a word. I am very excited today to have an amazing guest with us. Her name is Dr. Khandicia Randolph. She's got a Bachelor of Arts degree from University of Missouri. She holds a master's in public administration with specialization in public policy, Master of Arts in law from Regent University School of Law, and a Doctor of Strategic Leadership from the Regent University School of Business and Leadership. I welcome you today, Dr. Khandicia Randolph. That is, and you're muted. See, it shows me you're muted. I knew it.
I got you.
So welcome to the show, Dr. Randolph.
Thank you. Good. It's afternoon my time, so good afternoon for those of us or those of you all who are still in Pacific time zone. Good morning. And
Yes,
those who might be in Alaska or Hawaii, it's definitely still morning there. So, like, top of the
absolutely.
morning to you.
Well, I'm really honored to have you as a guest today on the show. I was excited, reached out, we got connected a little bit here on LinkedIn, and you have such an impressive background. You have just so much going on for you. I'm excited to get into talking about leadership and strategy. And then you're also an author. You published a book, The Black American Church: Leadership Dispensation and Challenges. Is that correct?
Yep,
Is that the
that is
correct
correct.
title?
Everything you said, everything correctly. Some people leave out the second half of the colon, but I tell people, I'm like, it's not a subtitle, that's the entire title. You have to look at both sides of it to understand what you're really going to read in the book. So, nope, that was perfect.
Absolutely. Well, if you would do me a favor, and for my audience that may not know you just yet, I would love if you would take, a minute or two and give people a little bit of your background, who you are, kind of what your leadership background is, how you came up, and a little bit about yourself. I would love to hear about that.
Sure. So I will admit this is probably the most uncomfortable part of the space that I'm in life right now, both as a leadership expert and as well as being an author. Is that people ask you to talk about yourself a lot, even in writing the bios. I find
Hmm.
it uncomfortable, and I don't know if it's because I'm really anti-narcissistic behaviors or what. But my name is Dr. Khandicia Randolph. I am originally, or not even originally, I am a native of the South Side of Chicago. A little fun fact: the neighborhood that Michelle Obama grew up in is where I am from, and her and I went to the same high school. So I'm a
Okay.
graduate of Whitney M. Young Magnet High School, one of the top 100 high schools in the country. As stated, I have 4 degrees, and while I love them all, of all of them, this last one is my passion. My law degree was a dream that God took a few years to manifest, and it was a dream I gave up on for a while. Um, and the Lord manifested it, and so for me, that degree just kind of represents God's faithfulness to me. And as I say that, it reminds me just of how faithful he's been to me. And so I just gave myself a message unintended there. But leadership and organizational development is definitely, as I put on LinkedIn the other day, it's my jam. I'm a leadership and org development expert. My specific interest in research entail looking at the mitigating effects of culture and race on leadership and followership. I have an article, there are a couple of academic articles I have. One is about the impacts of leadership and culture on the full range leadership development model. I have a textbook chapter that I co authored currently in publication that looks at the
Really?
impacts of culture and race on followership. And we can talk some more about what followership are later. Definitely cannot forget to mention that I am the oldest of 8 children. Um, I have 9 nieces and nephews with one on the way. And so I'm super excited that every day that I get up and I strive for greatness, I do it for my family. Let's see, other than that, if you were to say, what's your hobby? I love shopping and I love traveling. And as a leader, it is imperative. This is so funny to me. I realize I forgot my eyeliner. It is imperative that you have cultural agility and not just agility, but cultural competencies. And so I love traveling outside of the US. I have a saying that when I vacation outside of the US, because that's where I learn more about who the rest of the people in the world are, and it teaches you more about yourself. So love traveling. I have a goal of attending 50, or excuse me, not attending, but visiting over 50 countries. At last count, let's see, 20% would be 10 countries. So I'm almost at the 40% mark. I think I'm at 16 or 17
Wow.
as of last year. And also, excuse me, other than that, that's me in a nutshell. I'll share more about my leadership and consulting firm later. And obviously, I think we'll probably get into the painstaking points of the book. So that's me
Sure.
in a nutshell. I'm a little brown girl from the south side of Chicago who loves her family, who loves God, and who truly is passionate about leadership and organizational development, especially with nonprofits. So if I had to say, one thing about my leadership thing, I'm passionate about helping nonprofits truly maximize their global reach and impact.
That's phenomenal. I mean, what a background. And so you said you've been to 40% of countries traveling, and is that what you did I
I've
hear
been
that
to
right?
40% of my goal. So my
Of
goal
your
is to,
goal. Got it.
yeah. I wish I had been to 40%, but I'll get there. But
No,
yeah, my goal is 50 countries, and I have a list, and I won't say I go in order on the list. There's no order. It's just places that I want to go.
sure.
Um, and sometimes places I go are intentional, and sometimes it's just like, okay, well, let's go here.
That's awesome. So do me a favor. What drew you to, and again, welcome to the show. What drew you to leadership? Like, where did you get started? What would you say was the most impactful place you got started on leadership? I mean, certainly you've got
Hmm.
the background, you got the degrees and such for it, but where, like, practical application in life, where did you say, hey, I know I want to do that?
That's a twofold answer. So, practical application versus the academic
Hmm.
attainment. In terms of practical application, and I'm going to say this, and then I'm going to tell you that it's wrong. People will say that I'm, quote, a natural born leader. Okay, I just posted. Oh, that might be next week's post. So, spoiler alert for next week's post of the leadership Monday morning leadership thoughts and Tuesday tidbits. Like, leadership is not innate. It's not the great traits method of leadership has been debunked for like 100 years, right? So, I have behaviors and attributes that people relate or make them relatable. They coincide them with being a leader. I'm articulate. I'm passionate. I am direct. I'm some people would say highly intelligent. And so the person that you see before you, I'm not going to say I haven't developed and evolved. I have, but those core
Sure.
characteristics. I was the same person when I was like 5 and in second grade. I was smart. I was articulate. And so as I matriculated um, through elementary school, there were certain programs that I was selected for. I went to a Catholic school, St. Thomas the Apostle Elementary School on the south side of
Hmm.
Chicago. And there was a program specifically like called Junior Great Books. And you had to be in the fifth. It was the upper part of elementary school, so maybe fifth through eighth grade.
Hmm.
Nevertheless, in order to be, it was a group that was selected. In order to be selected, you had to have like certain, I think, whatever scores on the standardized test we took, as well as your scores in reading and comprehension. And so, in addition to the academic work that we did, we read an extra book every week, every 2 weeks, and then met in a group that I think happened after school. It's been a little while since elementary school, and you discussed it. So it
I
was
feel
like,
that.
it was an elementary school grown up book club situation, but you had to show leadership, excuse me, skills as well as academic astuteness. If I look at myself like in the eighth grade, my sister went to the same elementary school. She wanted to run track. And I don't run. Like, I only run if my hair is getting wet, if somebody's chasing me,
Yeah.
if I see other, black people. I was saying, we don't ask the questions. If somebody's running, a group of people are running, we just run with them. Like, it takes some very precocious and precarious circumstances for me to actually run. And so I was not going to be on the team, but my sister was in third grade. Um, she could not go home by herself after school. And so I stayed after school with her, and I managed the track team. And that
Okay.
year they actually won a certain award. And so I got an award as being the manager. And those behaviors that I was exhibiting then matriculated to high school. I actually managed our concert choir. I was the first concert choir manager because I wasn't good enough to make it in concert choir singing, but I still had a love and affinity for it. And so the director of the choir, excuse me, my allergies are horrible today, made me the manager. And so if you just look at that and then you move forward to my undergraduate career, I was a huge student leader. I was nominated for a Human Rights and Diversity Enhancement Award for my commitment to the Big 12 Conference on Black Student Government. I was the Student of the Year for advocating for diversity. And, the list goes on and on. And so you have those, again, what people are going to call natural attributes. It's not that I have an innate composition or biology to be a leader. It's that I think I naturally had some of the behaviors that make an effective leader and that make a good leader and a positive leader. And I chose to develop those behaviors, and other people saw those behaviors and they chose to invest in me and develop them in me. And so that's the practical implication. When you look at the
Well,
academic,
may I real quick here?
no,
The,
please, it's a
uh,
conversation.
the thing that I think is so unique, because I was taking notes for another video I plan to do, and like where you're saying, I do think there are certain people that have a predisposition for leadership, and usually when those people have that predisposition, you're right. Automatically from the outside looking in, and a lot of times I'll repeat and reshare what my guests share, so that way if people are taking notes, you're able to get this on the audio part, or if you're watching video. But that's when people look and go, oh, well, they're a natural born leader. But the natural born leader is because, like you're saying, they possess certain traits, right? They're intelligent, they're humble, they have a track record of success. Like, part of the reason you continued to get recruited into those positions is because you were successful and people saw that, and success is attractive. That's an attractive quality when people get results, so they're like, well, let's put that individual back in here. And so I think, even going back, because I think it's so unique. You're probably the second or third person on my show to say, hey, look, this started at a really early age, either elementary school or high school time frame, when you're influencing just by nature, sort of influencing people around you. And then not only does that become attractive to the outside world, people are like, oh, hey, that person's a winner, they're successful, we want to see them continue to do that. um, but that builds our own self-esteem. It builds our own confidence, and that in itself, like you're saying, hey, you can learn certain traits. Well, one of the traits, in my opinion, of a good leader is somebody having confidence in themselves and confidence in their abilities. And so I do agree with you. I think you can learn and groom and grow those things in you that are already leadership traits. And so kudos to you for recognizing that and continuing to do it, because I think that's something I think enough people don't realize. They think, oh, well, that person's just a leader. They're naturally they're like that. Or, oh, well, they were put in this position, so they had to be. And it's like, well, no, it's still, I mean, that's why there's a whole series of stuff on leadership development, right? You're able to develop it. So, okay. So the next piece, you said that was the practical application.
Yeah,
Next
that's the
then.
practical application. Before I get to the next piece, there's actually, now that you say that, there's probably three pieces. But I just want to point out something you said that's so key. And then I want anyone who's listening and goes back and watches this, or, even if you decide to go back and
Mhm.
watch it, or as you're thinking later about this conversation, you use the word influence. Peter Nordhaus, which is a leading leadership expert and author of several
Mhm.
textbooks, I use his definition of leadership because at its core it's the simplest and it's the first one academically that I learned. And
Yep.
what he
I
says
know
is
where you're
that,
going.
yeah, leadership is the ability to influence a group of people to a shared goal. And I'm pretty certain that that's the absolute quote with everything in the right places, because I use it
Yep.
from the very first time that I read it and had to cite it in a course to today. This is post being an author, post graduating, post academic curriculum. I explain people, and this was actually last week's leadership, Monday morning leadership thought, is that leadership at its core, at its nucleus, is about influence. And what people fail to realize is that you can be placed in a leadership role. First of all, the word leadership and leadership roles are not synonymous. You can have someone who's in a leadership role. They can be the CEO, they can be the CFO, they can be a parent, they can be the head of a Girl Scout
Yeah,
troop, they can be a teacher, you can be a principal. You might be in that leadership role and you're not a leader because you're not exercising any influence over other individuals and you're not helping them get to a goal that's already predetermined and that everyone buys into, either because of your behaviors, because of your attitudes, because of your lack of vision, because you don't understand the vision. There's so many things that go into it, and I don't want to get too granular here. I'll try to keep it
sure.
high level, but just understanding that what you said is so key about the influence, because you don't have to be in a leadership role to be a leader. And when we do, as you said, when we develop those attributes and those behaviors that people have, that kids have as a child, when you develop and nurture those behaviors and you use them in positive ways, because there's such thing as negative leadership. There's good
Absolutely.
leaders and bad leaders, but that's different than destructive leaders and positive leaders. Okay. So when we actually nurture those positive attributes, which is why I said I don't like using I, because it's narcissistic, and narcissism is actually a tenet of destructive leadership. And so in leadership is actually not about the individual. How you enact your leadership is somewhat about you, but leadership, the process of leadership, is more so it's about a group of people. It's never about a person. And so anyone who's listening, just remember that you have the ability to influence any and everyone as long as you are in the room. You don't have to
Mm,
be at the table. You don't have to be heading the conversation or the meeting. You don't have to be the CEO. However, as long as you are in that room, you have the opportunity not just to affect leadership, but organizational development and effectiveness. And too many times
love
we
that.
don't teach that. We teach that to be a leader, you have to be the first. You have to be at the head of the class. No, what you have to do is influence a group of people to get somewhere. So you might have a CEO who's absolutely ineffective. But if their manager or VP of sales is a rock star leader and has that influential impact and factor, well, the VP of sales is then going to translate that down to the master, excuse the master, Lord, the manager of sales or the various managers. That then is going to carry through to your individual leaders, your account service people, your account managers. And even though the CEO may be totally ineffective, if you have a VP of sales who is a true leader and who knows how to connect and is relatable, those behaviors are then going to fuel into the rest of the organization. Um, so yeah, just in that
I
kind of goes
absolutely.
back real quick. So that's like
Yeah.
number two of how I got into this space is I am the oldest of eight. And so by
Hmm.
default, there was a leadership position. I won't say that I'm a leader by default because of that, but there was a leadership position that I was born into. I was born first, and it becomes a matter of, do you take up the mantle to be supportive, to lead by example, to be comforting, to challenge people to be their best, or do you just say, okay, yeah, I was here first? It's a choice.
I think that's really powerful that you say that too. Leadership is a choice. I remember when you're talking about followers and people getting in behind a leader and having influence. There's a quote, I think it's by John Maxwell, and I could be off on this, but I love Maxwell as an author. And one of the comments that he makes, he says, "Look, if you get to the top of the mountain and you realize that nobody's following you, right? There's nobody there, you're not a leader, you're a hiker." So that's one of the key things. And I shared this even on my social media not long ago, is like leadership, leadership is determined by your people. Your people put you there. It is never about the title. And I think that's something that I love. That I love the statement that you made, that you said you don't got to be at the table, you just got to be in the room, right? I
That's
think
it.
that's such a powerful statement. So gosh, there was something else I was going to ask you. So, Northhouse, when you were talking about, like leadership theory and practice, because I love that, and he talks about some of the without giving it away here, right? Because a lot of people will say, okay, I have these leadership traits, or you commented on having specific leadership traits or being a born leader and so forth. In Northhouse's textbooks, he has specific leadership traits laid out. I always like to ask my guests, for you, because a lot of them will coincide, but some of them are a little bit different. You can pick out different stuff for different people. For you, what are your top 3 to 5 leadership traits, not for yourself, but for somebody that you would get in behind? What do you
Okay.
think are 3 to 5 leadership traits?
So just a small delineation, because otherwise my professors would probably choke me, and a few of them are on LinkedIn.
It's
When
okay.
we when we talk about leadership, so in Nordhaus does outline a lot of different, we're going to call them layers of leadership for now, but he
Mm-hmm.
goes through a lot of theories. And so a lot of people don't realize that leadership is not just as simple as, like you said, getting up and telling someone what to do. You can get up and tell somebody what to do, and they never move. When you think about a parent and kids, there are plenty of situations where I've seen people's parents get up and ask them to do something, and they just sit there. But then the grandmother might get up, another adult might get up, even a sibling might get up and say something, and the kid moves. And a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people correlate that to respect, and it is respect, because in order for somebody to influence you, you have to have a certain level of respect, even if that respect is just fear. So it tells us that that parent in that situation has zero influence over the kid. Um, and so in that, Nordhaus does outline several of these leadership theories. You said, in order for me to follow someone, that's a great question, because typically, people ask you about your leadership style.
Mm-hmm.
Ugh, um, honestly, and this does sound narcissistic, but I'm okay with it in this instance. I would want the person, and let me point this out as well. When you're looking at your leadership style, or those leadership qualities that you're looking for, let's use the word quality.
Okay.
Let's move from the word, away from the word trait, and I won't use the word behaviors, because again, I don't want to be over technical. Let's just say qualities that you look for in a leader.
Okay.
It's going to be transformational,
Okay.
authentic, and servant. Now, let me make some very wonderful quick pro quos about this.
Okay.
When you're talking about developing as a leader, leaders should never only want to have one type of leadership theory quality. Okay, so again, one leadership quality. We're going to reterm it for our conversation here. Me and
Okay.
Mike, we're calling these qualities. So if you are a doctor of strategic leadership, a PhD in org leadership, just go with me. We're not saying traits, we're saying qualities, right? If you shouldn't just have one dominant quality as a leader. You have to be multifaceted. Ekstrom, don't remember his first name, but
Mm-hmm.
Ekstrom says that a good leader has a repertoire of leadership qualities that they hold in their arsenal. And so one thing I hear a lot of people say is, and I've got a manuscript that's on the way back burner. I started it, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm moving some projects ahead of it. But spoiler alert, the topic is the dangers of servant leadership. And the reason I believe that this was bequeathed to me is because a lot of people, when you ask them about leadership, the one that I hear time and time and time and time again is, "Oh, she's a servant leader. He's a servant leader."
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing wrong with servant leadership. Let's be clear, okay? But people don't understand that you need a diversified portfolio. So let's come up with that term. I don't know if that term's out there in the leadership world, but I'm
Diversify your
coining it now.
leadership portfolio. Gotcha.
Yes, you have to have a diversified portfolio. Um, and the other part of that is, there's a couple of reasons you have to have a diversified portfolio, or at least to think of it in that way. Maybe you're not great at embodying all of those qualities right now. And so maybe you start with one. It's just like when you start a monetary portfolio. You
Mm-hmm.
may originally start off in a mutual fund, because with mutual funds, you have a slower rate of attainment, but you have a smaller rate of risk. If you want to be super cautious, then you do use stocks and bonds or savings account. Well, not even a savings account these days, because
No.
those rates go everywhere every other day. But with
That's a
stocks and
whole
bonds,
different conversation.
right? But with a bond, you buy that bond, and for 5 years you're going to get an interest rate of 5%. So if you just want to be like very cautious in the beginning, you say, "Well, I'm just a transformational leader." Okay. Well, 2 years after you buy the bond, you say, "Well, I want something that's going to grow my money a little quicker. Let's look at mutual funds." Okay, mutual funds are still semi-safe, but they can go up and down as well. Let's be clear. There's a lot more of a roller coaster ride. And then after maybe say 5 to 7 years, you say, "Okay, well, I've got a good growth here. I've got dividends coming in from the mutual fund. Let me try my hands at stocks." As a leadership professional, let me give you 2 words of advice.
Okay.
One, if you're going to try your hand at the leadership stock, do not watch the market every day.
I get
And
where
do
you're
not
going.
expect exponential growth overnight. And I analogize that for myself, because when I began investing in stocks independently, I had money in the stock market through my financial advisor, and I depended on him to tell me what I should do, where I should go. I had money in savings accounts, I had money in other mutual funds. But when I decided I wanted to go through my wealth management provider's website and buy stock in L Brand and in Tapestry and Nike on my own, I literally drove myself crazy for like the first couple of weeks, because I'm logging in multiple times a day to see, did this stock decrease? Did it increase? I'm looking at the little notifications on my computer. Oh, the NASDAQ is up by 12. Oh, Dow Jones is down by 50 points, right? It drove me crazy.
Gosh.
And so when you're looking at leadership, and when you're looking at developing in leadership, when you're in that infancy stage, and then as you're growing and as you're developing, you cannot expect to go from bonds to being in a stockbroker, in a stock exchange broker like the next day. You have to, I won't say you have to perfect those first qualities, because you don't. Like, as you grow and develop, you're going to continue to perfect them, but you have to get a solid footing on them. You have to know, okay,
Sure.
I am a solid transformational leader. Now let's work on my authenticity. Let's work on my servant leadership. Let's work on my situational leadership. And you also have to understand that although you might look at prominent qualities in a leader, so let's say for you and I, so Mike and I, we determined that we want somebody to be transformational, we want them to be authentic, and we want them to be a servant leader. There are going to be times where maybe none of those are called for, or maybe it's not that they're not called for or not appropriate, but a different style of leadership is really going to work better for you and your followers. And sometimes you just have to be situational. And then let's just be really honest about it, right? There's a leadership theory called transactional leadership. If you've ever been in a transactional relationship as it relates to leadership, followership, and organizations, raise your hand. I want to make sure you guys see me raising my hand.
Tit
right?
for tat. Here we go.
It's you come to work, you work a certain amount of hours, I give you a paycheck, right? By the time I left my last employer, that's what it was. It was totally transactional. I was going for a set amount of time to do some amount of work, and then I left. And I think that people who are not deep enough, use the word deep because I'm trying to keep it simple, those people who are just not deep enough and who don't know enough about leadership, sometimes, and then even those of us who do, we bash transactional leadership because it's not the pinnacle of leadership. And so we bash it. But the truth is, some situations are really truly transactional. Some relationships are transactional. Like when you go to the pharmacist to pick up your meds, how many people sit and try to change the lives of the pharmacy people?
Well, when you go to pick up your meds, how the question becomes like, you're expecting, okay, I show up, that person is the professional, I'm going to trust them because of their expertise and experience, we're going to transact, and we're moving on. Right?
Exactly.
That's it. It's straightforward.
It's straight again, like you said, we're going to transact and move on. And in that instance, it's nothing wrong with it. Now, do those of us, especially those of us who live in smaller um, towns and don't live in metro metropolises like Chicago, where I'm from, do we possibly expect, and if not expect, do we enjoy the fact that, okay, I go to the same pharmacy, I go once a week, so the people know my name, they smile at me? Sure, you like those things, but you're not looking for the pharmacist to change your life. You're not
Right.
looking for the pharmacist to be overly magnetic in personality, which is what charismatic leadership is. Like you said, you are looking to roll up to the window, walk inside. They say, "Hi, how are you? I'm fine. How are you? Great." Like, oh, and honestly, when I went, most of the time when I go to the pharmacy, it's not even "Hi, how are you," which is okay. I'm not bashing the pharmacy people because that's what I'm there for. They say, "Hi,
Right.
last name." You give them the last name. They say first name. Give them first name. You give them your date of birth. They confirm what you're picking up. You sign a pad. You sign a sheet of paper, and you walk away. And we have to understand, those of us who are looking to lead and those of us who are followers, because sometimes it's the followers' fault. And there's a whole theory called followership. I'm not going to get into it, but understand that those
Well,
of
we
us who are
could.
followers, we have a responsibility in order for leadership to succeed. We have to play an active role. Like you said, Maxwell said, if you get to the top of the mountain and it's just you're not even hiking, because if you're going to the top of Mount Kilimanjaro, you're not going alone. You at least have
Absolutely.
two other people with you. So if you get there all by yourself, you're not even a hiker. You live in the desert. You
You're
are
about
an
to be extinct. That's what's
ding
going
ding
to
ding.
happen.
Right. You're like an Eskimo on the south part of South America. It's just you alone. You're in solitude. And so as followers, and let's look at what a follower is real quickly,
Yeah, I
because
would love
the
it.
word follower gets a negative rap until you become a leadership nerd. That's what I call myself. Yes, I'm a leadership expert, but I tell people all the time I'm a leadership and org nerd, and I'm okay with it because I love it.
Love
A
it.
follower is somebody who acquiesces or they consent. They give somebody their permission to lead them. So you're giving somebody permission to influence you to go somewhere or accomplish something. So as a follower, you might feel like, um, let's use somebody's pastor, for example. And if you're not Christian, um, rabbi, if you're Jewish, if you're Muslim, oh, I forget what the head of the Muslim mosque are called, but whatever your religious affiliation is, and if you have no religious affiliation, that's fine too. Just imagine that they're the head of whatever organization you want to belong to. Let's say that usually that person is truly charismatic and they're warm, and they usually have lots of words and hugs and and accolades for you or admonishments. Well,
Sure.
you walk up to them one day and you say, hi, I have a question. Okay. Is service, is the meeting, is the prayer call, is the chant, whatever it is we're doing, is that meeting still scheduled for next Wednesday at 7? And they say yes. And then they either prepare to walk away or they look back at their computer or they do whatever. As a follower, we can't get mad at that person because really, did they owe us anything beyond the yes? That's not really the time for a transformational experience. That's not the time to be overly magnetic in personality. That's not the time for, in servant leadership, we're putting the needs of the people, individuals before us. But did that really need to occur? No. All
No.
you had a question. They provided the answer. The transaction is complete. If you want
Well,
all the other stuff, go into a new transaction.
no, absolutely. And if I may, it's like it's one of those things, and I visualize, I like I can see in my mind's eye what you're saying to happen, right? Someone says, "Hey, is there still service at 7 this week? This Wednesday or whatnot?" And they say, "Yeah." And then if the person's still standing there, the pastor, the leader, whomever looks at him and is like, "Do you need anything else?" Like, now what? Right? What's next? And I no, I think that's a very good analogy. So well, and I like the definition of what you have a follower, because it is very easy in our society as a whole, I think it's very easy when someone gets called a follower, that normally carries a negative connotation, right? Oh, they're a follower. They're just falling in line with somebody. They're falling in line with, and oftentimes, especially like you've used a lot of comparisons and analogies when it comes to kids, right? Most of the time parents don't want their kids to be followers, right? Because then they can fall in with the wrong crowd, or there's all these other things that come with that. So that's, we carry that definition, we carry the weight of that definition through our lives, saying, well, a follower is a bad thing. But the reality is we do need people that are excellent at every level. We do need people that are plugged in, consensual followers that want an opportunity to grow at all levels. And the reality is, even as a leader, somebody's tuned in, watching or listening to this right now, and as a leader, there are times that you're going to be a follower if you want to grow the most. You are not always going to be the one at the top of the mountain. You won't always be the one. We talked about, okay, look, if we're climbing to the top of the mountain and so forth, there are times you may be the most badass kick butt leader there is out there, right? But all of a sudden, if you're taken out of your element and you're saying, okay, well, look, what I really need is a guide to get up this mountain. You're immediately giving that leadership away, and you're saying, hey, I will follow you because you know what I'm doing, and or you know what you're doing and I don't. So I think it's really relevant to the conversation. And I really like the fact that you brought that up, is like, hey, let's define what a follower is. That's solid.
Absolutely.
So
That's what you get by being a leadership nerd. So before you ask the next question, just imagine
yes,
it,
ma'am.
and you said it perfectly. We teach our kids, one thing you always hear them say is, don't be a follower. And I thought about this while you were saying it. So I'm so happy you didn't speak more than 30 more seconds longer, because I might have forgotten. But we tell our kids, don't be a follower. But then you tell your kids to do something, and when they don't do it, what do you tell them? You need to follow instructions.
Mhm.
So on one hand, we say, don't be a follower, but then we also tell them, you need to follow me. You need to do what I say do. And so the question, not the question, but the conversation, as from a leadership development and a leadership expert perspective, now becomes, for me, what I try to help people do. And I don't necessarily tell parents this about their kids, but those who are listening, please tell your kids. What we need to start teaching our kids is learn who to follow, learn what
Mm,
to follow, learn how to follow. Not necessarily don't be a follower, because you can't always be the leader. Let's just be honest about it. Like, unless you are, you know what? There's not even an example in this world. I was going to use an example of the British royals. Like, okay, you're born into, you know, but they have rules they have to follow. There are certain things they can wear, can't wear, where you can live. You can't have a last name. So anybody who's out there watching, not that I'm in love with British people, but I like to know things. And it just kind of irritated me one day. I was like, why don't these people have last names? This is dumb. Well, they don't have last names. I'm not saying I agree with it, and I'm not even caring, honestly. Just, a little tidbit of information, right? But they have rules. We all have to follow it at some point. And so it would be advantageous, and it would do us a better service to embrace this, like you said, this new understanding and definition of what being a follower is, because it's necessary in the leadership system. Followers are just as necessary as the leader. And in fact, they're more necessary. Because again, if you're at the top of the mountain bike, you're not leading anything or anyone but yourself. And if you're the only one there, you might be leading yourself incorrectly, because what if you're not good with directions?
absolutely. It's funny you say that. So that's my friend Ben from Leadership Jetway. He's in the UK. He says British people are pretty neat. so he's a fan. The other thing that was brought up, he says most leaders are often followers too. Run a pretty big department, but I have a boss and she has a boss and so forth. We're all leadership nerds. So so that's for sure. Let me shift gears on you a little bit, Dr. Randolph, if I may. So the book, how recent is this book that you published?
It is 4 months, was released four
Okay.
months ago. So yeah, the release date, like if you look on Amazon, it tells you March 3rd, but that's a whole lie. So April 17th, I
Okay.
believe it was the official release date.
So you published, and I listened to a little bit of another podcast you participated in, and I really liked your answer on this. So I'm going to ask a similar question, but you published the Black American Church Leadership Dispensation and Challenges. And it's in the top 100 in Amazon for its category and so forth. So congratulations on that. Kudos to that.
Thank you.
And I am for myself. It's interesting you bring that up. I'm very much a faith based leader myself, and so that's something that I'm interested in. I'm interested. I'll have to go on and pick up a copy of your book. The question that was posed, it was by another podcast host, and she said, "Hey, does that narrow your audience? Like the title is the Black American Church. That's, and I know that's not the full title, but just for the sake of conversation, the Black American Church does that narrow the audience? Because especially like for someone like myself, who I'm very well rooted in my faith and my leadership, explain how you, if you don't mind, talking about how did you land on that? Who's the book for, and what is a little bit of the conversation involved inside?
Okay, so that's three or four questions.
Well,
Let's
so pick
start with, oh
one.
no, yeah, no, we can hash all of them, right? So let's start
Absolutely.
with, is it just for people who are Black or who go to a Black church? Let's just use those four words, the Black
Sure.
American Church. It's not just for Americans, it's not just for Black people, and it's not just for people who go to a Black church, and it's not just for people who go to a church, okay? The information is universally applicable, it's cross sectional, cross faith, cross denomination, it is multidimensional in a various set of ways.
So it's for everybody.
It's for everybody. To attack the second part of how I came to write on that subject matter, and then we'll go back
Yeah.
to its applicability based on the title. The subject matter was birthed out of a project I did in 2019. That sounds right. In 2019, and I tell this story in the full spectrum so that people get it. I had a member of an organization that I belonged to. She belonged to a separate branch, as I explained it. So a separate branch of the organization called me one evening, was like, "Hey, I know, let me put this in context. I was in my first full semester of being a doctorate student, excuse me, a doctoral student in strategic leadership." And she calls me and says, "I have a question. I know you're studying." And so I said, "Okay, well, I can give you like 5 minutes. What's up?" And she said, "Well, do you happen to know a mediator?" I said, "Well, I do belong to the American Bar Association. Let me look it up and see if there's anyone who's in your city, like on the registry, that I could refer you to." And she proceeds to say, "Well, let me explain to you what the situation is." And after an explanation of the situation, me and all of my infinite wisdom at this point, and you can take me off the screen and bring you back up, it's fine. Um, and all of my infinite wisdom at that point, I say, "Oh, well, you don't need a mediator. You need a leadership and org development specialist." And I said, because a mediator is just going to come and sit and listen, make sure everyone is heard out, make sure that, oh, here, I hear this person saying this, you hear them saying that. And then that's kind of the end of it. And so I decided that at that point I was already a leadership expert. And
Hmm.
I said, "Well, you know what? Let me take this information. Let me give you a call back in a moment." My university had our research roundtables, which is an annual research conference, and each section known as a roundtable has a different track. So there's global consulting, foresight, biblical perspectives, innovation, and like four or five other things.
Okay.
And I thought about submitting something, but again, I was on my first full semester. I had taken one class a semester before that. I was on my first full semester. I wasn't quite certain if it would get, not even that I wasn't certain. I was nowhere near certain that I would get accepted. I was nowhere near certain if I was ready. And the tract I was originally looking at submitting to was the servant leadership tract. And it was going to be a review of an article that
Okay.
centered around servant leadership. So after I do, this conversation with the person, do my little analysis, kind of arrange it according to what the requirements are for the conference, I called back and said, "Okay, so I've reviewed what you said. This is, do you agree with this point? Yes. Do you think this is," because I went to a Christian school, "do you think this is an applicable scripture to your problem?" Yeah. I said, okay, do you think that I'm phrasing, this assessment of what you told me correctly? They said yes. I said, okay, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to submit to be in this conference. If I get accepted, then I'll have to do the research and you all will get it'll be done for free. It's a whole free consulting thing for you
Sure.
all. And I got accepted. And then it was like, oh God, what did I really get myself into? But then fast forward to the end of it, as I'm analyzing the data that I got back from participants and writing the paper in the recommendations for the executive leadership of the organization, I realized that a lot of the behaviors I saw in the members of that group mimicked what I've experienced in church. And I go to a Black church, and let me be clear of how Black is defined in this context. It's not just people who are Black, but there is
Sure.
actual a research definition of Black churches, and it involves primarily the historically Black denominations that comprise the Church of God in Christ. You have the various Baptists, so the National Baptist Convention, Baptist USA. You're looking at AME, CME, AME Zion. And so that is the scholastic, we'll call it, definition of leadership. So I go to one of those denominations. I won't put on blast which one it is.
Well, if I may, because
You may,
I will tell you, there is a difference for anybody who's been, and I'm a fan of church, and I do love attending a Black church because it's a whole different energy and environment. We'll just call it like it is. I know exactly, and for anybody who's watching this, that is familiar, just the energy, the conviction. I can't even put my finger out, but I know exactly what you're saying. It's
No,
awesome.
you're good. There's a difference. I went to a funeral last week and they were Presbyterian. I mean, like the pastor was Black, and most of the congregation appeared possibly to be Black people who were there, not from the organization that I belong to or other people, but it just wasn't, it was just the choir members were all Black, but it wasn't a Black church. So anywho,
I
um,
understand.
so yeah, so just looking at what the definition is, so that we're understanding what I'm saying, for integrity's sake.
Yes.
I realized that those behaviors were behaviors that I had seen in church, at business meetings, by being on committees. And so, me being me, I asked myself the question. I said, did the behaviors come from the organization, or did the behaviors come from the church? And by sheer
Mm.
chronology in history, the Black church came first. The Black church is the first institution for Black people, by Black people in America. And so that's what led me to it. For those who are unfamiliar with the book is my final project manuscript. I did write that to graduate. So when you get it, yes, it's a lot. I'm an overachiever. But I knew in that moment. So then going into my second year, when we had our residency, we were asking in one of the class sessions, well, does anyone know what they want to write about? Everybody's just kind of sitting there staring at the dean and the director of the program. So me, I look up from my computer. They say,
Hmm.
yes, Khandicia. I said, well, I want to look at the connection between leadership behaviors in the Black church and how they matriculate to other spaces in society. And they were like, oh, like you for real know what you like. You have it there. I did,
Right.
because I had seen it there. And so yeah, that's how we got here. I took the idea. I never let go of the idea. There were hurdles that I had to get past. I had to get around my initial thought of how I was going to present the material, because I just kind of wanted to jump into it, and just to give some people an idea of how it's laid out. Chapters 1 and 2 originally did not exist. My doctoral chair
Interesting.
was like, well, you don't have an introduction, you don't have a conclusion. When I think about it, I was like, oh, well, yeah, duh, you need an intro and a conclusion. But in my mind at that point, a manuscript, I'm just thinking of like a large paper. And you
Hmm.
don't have a whole separate, you have an introduction section, but it wasn't chapter thoughtish in my point. Like, I guess in my mind, I thought I was just going to do the introduction in chapter 1. And of course, I'm going to have a conclusion, but it'll be at the end of that chapter, right? No. I want an introduction chapter. I want a conclusion chapter. Since you're gathering original data, I want a results chapter. And she wanted a chapter on COVID. So chapter 10, 11, 12. Yeah, it's chapter 10. So chapter 10, anybody who buys the book and reads the book, you can thank Dr. Cavler, because I had no plans on writing about COVID or or disruptors. That's the name, that's the title of the chapter, COVID and disruptors. But it was a necessary part. But going back to
Takes its place in history right now for sure.
and that's what, and from an OD and a leadership perspective, and again, I don't want to give too many spoiler alerts, but even things we think don't matter, the leadership system is comprised of everything. And so everything matters, everything affects everything. And I originally was just going to jump into the leadership aspect of it. So I would have gone straight into chapter 4 if I had my way. Let's talk about what leadership is. Then, let's talk about collaboration, knowledge, skills, abilities, and competencies, the broader societal context. And, when we had that meeting and discussed that, she was like, yeah, no, we're scrapping your title. Your little explanation that you gave me here, I need more than that. She said, so what are you going to do beyond this point? What if they don't like? She said, so you're going to gather this information and then what? I said, excuse me. She said, so what? Who cares? I said, well, what do you mean who cares? Like at this point I was mad.
I care. What you talking about?
I care, right? She was like, are you just going to sit and tell people what their problems are? I said, well, no, ma'am. I said, I plan to give recommendations that are, practical for implementation to change the deficiency. She says, oh, okay. But in chapters 1 and 2, what I do, instead of just launching into here's leadership 101 or leadership probably 1001, I look at the connection between the culture of Black Americans and the church. I give you a historical perspective so that you understand why the church has such an influence, factor, and impact, which means why is it such a leader? And I look at that pervasiveness of that institution in the culture so that people understand why the leadership dispensation and challenges. So then you get to the other part of the book, which is the good part for me, is you understand why those challenges in that leadership system and how Black churches as a conglomerate and individually operate as organizations, how they really do affect the rest of society. One example that I used in the podcast that you're speaking about that I did, that was last week, was they're not just implications for America. I termed it the Black American Church, and I did that on purpose. I didn't want to just say the Black Church, and there are plenty of other manuscripts about the Black American Church. They say the Black Church. But I wanted to make that delineation because I did not want Black churches globally to feel by any means marginalized. I did not want them to think that the Black church in America experience was a universal experience, or that any challenges that were found in our leadership systems here are deficiencies, just like they're not the same in each church in the US. I didn't want to project that onto a global society. That's not my place. But what the research shows, and it's not my specific research, but that I talk about in the book, the research shows that the Black American Church doesn't just have domestic implications. It had broader global, or has broader global implications. Not only do some denominations like the Church of God in Christ have jurisdictions abroad, they just started a jurisdiction, I think it was earlier this year in Jerusalem, if I'm not mistaken. So not only do the denominations have global affiliate churches affiliate church is the proper term, but the church expands outside of the US. I'm getting complicated for no reason. The church exists in other countries, but it's not just that the churches exist in other countries as part of their denominations, but the Black church was used to fuel plenty of social movements in this country. And not just that part, but the more intricate part of that is that leaders of those movements have been drawn out of the church. And so what that projected then onto other countries, specifically on the continent of Africa and in some that were in South America, was if this movement, if these people who believe in this religious thought paradigm here can help fuel, a movement for equality and equal pay and justice, can we use this same paradigm to help us acquire our own liberties and civil rights? And so anytime you have, and by you, I mean the institution, so we're talking about the conglomerate
Sure.
institution of 25 plus million people who make up this cohesive definition. Anytime you have that much of an influence factor, you have to talk about the accountability. You have to make sure that people are astute and equipped leaders. And because as a member, I saw some of those gaps, I had a passion, and I also felt an academic responsibility to the Black community, to the Black church community, to the American community, and to the global community to talk about those gaps and to talk
Sure.
about things that are done right and to talk about things that are done wrong. And that's the part that nobody really wants to talk about. We always like to talk about what people do right. And I don't have a problem talking about what people do right. But if you're doing it right, you know how to do it right. When we're not doing it so correctly, it means we need some help. And so that's really what I want people to get out of the book. It is a critical analysis, let's be clear. But as I state in the book, and I state this on every podcast that I do or every interview that I do, it is a critical analysis. I don't take that away. I use those words to describe it. But it is not a condemnation. And I need us to understand the difference as a group of humans.
Sure.
I have the right and the responsibility, or I had it and still do, to have performed a critical analysis, not just in my writings, but because various members of various denominations participated in my data gathering set. And so I did qualitative data. And so my conclusions and my recommendations are based upon what the actual members said. I had a right and a responsibility to do that critical analysis, but I am not condemning the church or its leaders. Yes, you
I think that's spot
absolutely,
on.
you have to grow. Like if you don't talk about what's wrong, you can't fix it. And that's just even
Yep.
with yourself. I have conversations all the time with myself about, you know what, you really shouldn't have done that. You didn't think that through, did you? Okay. Let's work on that.
Well, and I think that's a great comment. Laissez Faire says, you grow when you do talk about the things that have gone wrong. And I think that there's a couple things I picked up from you talking about the book. One, I love the fact that you said it was your professor, the person you were working with, challenged you to say, okay, well, don't just be a problem spotter. You can't just pick the stuff out and tell all the wrong stuff. Like what else? And you're saying, okay, well, they're recommendations. For me, I would spin it as, okay, well, you're not just seeing what's wrong, but you're providing solutions also. Now it's up to people to see it that way or to make the determination. But that's what I hear you saying in a sense. And then the other thing that I really like, and you said this at the end here, and then Lachey shares it in the comments, is it's like nobody wants to talk about what's wrong. I had my friend Sean on several weeks ago. He's a pastor also, and he brought up that point. He says, nobody ever wants to talk about the elephant in the room, right? When the leader's not there, and in this case, like you're talking about a whole group, a large group of leaders. But even if you go down to the micro level, if you have a leader that's not doing things right, they're doing the wrong thing. Nobody wants to talk about it when the leader's in the room, but when they leave, everybody's talking about it because it's happening. And I would bet you when you're talking about the Black American church, everybody knows it's happening, but nobody wants to address that. And so I commend you for taking that and saying, okay, well, look, let's talk about it. Let's have a real conversation rather than skewed to one way or the other. I could be off. I don't think I am, just from hearing you speak a little bit. Like you're saying, hey, let's have. I love the fact you're referring to it as a critical analysis, because you're not saying, hey, I'm just going to come and sugarcoat this and say all the good things, but at the same time, I'm not going to crap coat it either.
Yep.
On both sides, you got to look at what it really is. So that's I think that is absolutely fantastic. I actually I'm interested to pick up a copy for myself, because I'd love to see some more
Well,
of what you
you're
have to share.
correct. You're not wrong. So I will make sure you know you have gotten it totally, and you actually use the term that I use when I'm doing just specifically book interviews. It's now that you have this information, let's have the conversation. And I believe, and I can grab the book from the bookshelf there, but in my very last chapter, the last paragraph, I say, there's a saying that once you know better, you do better. And now
Oh
that we
gosh.
know better, we must do better. And that's how so spoiler alert, that's how I end the book, right? But that doesn't
I
tell you
love
much
it.
other than that. But
I love it.
that it is. I want us to have a conversation. So now that you've read the book, and I tell people when I meet them in person, if I hand them a card, I say, once you've read it, give me a call. My phone number's on there, my email address. Give me a call. Let's have a conversation. And one first lady, so the pastor's wife, this church, my goddaughter was having her baby dedicated, christened, and my goddaughter's grandmother made an announcement about me and writing the book. And so the pastor's wife came up to me and spoke to me afterwards and took some cards and some sell sheets. And I said, here, after you pick it up, give me a call. My number's on here. Let's talk. Let's have a conversation. And she said, really? I said, yeah, I didn't write the book to make people angry. Like, do I realize it's going to rub some people the wrong way? Sure, absolutely. And I can live
Sure.
with that. But the intent, again, isn't condemnation and it's not an indictment. It's to provide a critical analysis, and then let's have a conversation about how we fix it. Invite me in to do trainings on communication. If you read chapter whatever it is on communications, now I feel bad because I don't know. Well, see, the chapters got moved around. So chapters are not in the order they were supposed to. You're laughing. You're so chapter 8 is
No,
communication.
I think it's no, I think it's great, because but that's the thing. That's, to me, when you're saying it like that, I'm laughing. The way that I carry it is because it's like, the information so well, you're not worried about dividing it into chapters. You're like, I don't need to I don't need to split that piece out in my head. Here's the layout, and you wrote it from a place of, I think, genuine caring and opportunity for growth for people. I mean, I
Abs-
just see you talk about it, and your passion comes right through.
People tell me that, and so I am grateful for that. And there's another point that I forgot to answer about a question. I'm going to go back to that in a moment for you. But you're right, I am passionate about it. Proverbs 3 tells us that when you make room for your gift, it will it will make room for you and bring you before great men.
Second
And
time I've heard that in 2 days.
people tell me, had a conversation giving someone some advice and encouragement. She recently switched industries, and she's like, do you think I can do this? What are some helpful hints? One of my sorority sisters. And I said, you can. These are some things you need to think about, right? I said, well, we've gone over our time. I hope I was helpful. I hope I didn't give too much like stark reality. She said, no, you've been very good. This is the longest convo I've ever had. I've taken notes. She said, if you have so much great information. I said, well, I usually charge people $400 an hour for this information, so you got it for free. She was like, oh yeah, I can't afford that. I said, I'm not asking you for it. I said, but understand that as a leadership and work development expert, you know, I just see things differently. And she says, and I can tell you really love it. And we were on the phone. She wasn't looking at me like you are. She said, I can tell you really love it and are passionate about it. It just comes through in what you say. And so I am grateful. I am blessed. I am favored that I got it right this last time. And I'm not saying the degrees 1 through 3 were for naught, because they're not. Um, they were absolutely necessary, not professionally, so to speak, but they were necessary personally and for my personal development. And I'm glad that I was allowed to end it. And I'm really trying to stay true to that, not get another degree. But I'm glad that I ended it on what really makes me smile and what comes through on the words of my pages and through screens. And so I am grateful for that. And I wanted to go back to that one piece really quickly when you asked earlier
Mhm.
about who can, and we got off into another topic and I forgot about it.
That's what we do here on the show.
Uh, who can read the book? Who is the audience? I answered that it's applicable to everyone. I answered how I got to the book. That's what it was. We asked them in two pieces, and I guess we're still on that piece. Here's the third piece about that. When you see a book, so by and large, and I saw a YouTube, or it was on YouTube, but I saw a clip. Someone sent me something last week, and it's so applicable now, and I think about it all the time. And it was mentioned last week in the podcast as well, right?
Mhm.
So anybody who knows history, just if you pick up a book about, it's just titled American History, if it's a textbook, if it's a book at Barnes and Noble or whatever, American history is not American history. American history is American white people history.
That's fair.
And it's predominantly American white male history. But you still teach it in school. You still require everyone to learn it. If you grow up in the U.S., at some point you're going to have to learn who was the first president of the U.S. You're probably going to require the second because we just feel like if there's more than two, you should know number two. That's just how we think, like in America, right? You're going to learn who the third is because it was Thomas Jefferson. You're going to learn about something about Franklin Roosevelt because he sat in the position the longest. He died in office. He's the reason that they changed the Constitution to give people a 2-term limit with 2 other potential years. I was a political science major as well. But none of that has to do with like half the people in America. But we never question whether or not American history is for all Americans or all people. America thinks that everybody should read about, for lack of better words, a bunch of dead white people. And so, as a society, we need to transform the way we think. In, am I excluded from the conversation because it says Japanese American history? Or if you know the history of Pearl Harbor and you know that the Japanese bombed us, if I'm not Japanese or if I wasn't in the military, do I not pick up the book and read it, right?
Sure.
We typically don't see things, and especially for white Americans, they don't see things as exclusionary to them unless it has another minority qualifier or adjective to it. And
That's
so,
interesting.
and so anybody who's watching this, white, black, Turkish, Hungarian, Latino, Latina, indigenous, of faith, not of faith, educated, not educated, male, female, I think that covers most people and the rest of our global community. The book is for you, not just because the information is cross-culturally applicable, but because we're talking about a human organization. And Maya Angelou said, I am human. Nothing human is foreign to me. And so even if it's not about your immediate particular leadership system or your immediate particular struggle, it doesn't mean that as a human, you cannot learn something from it.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I just wanted to make sure that I touched on that point as well.
No, I think that's great. And I mean, there's a lot of power in that, and I appreciate you sharing that. So
No problem.
as we come down to the end here, we're a little bit over an hour. So any final thoughts? No, hey, when the conversation goes there, the conversation goes there. Believe me, I get into a role with somebody. If we're in a rhythm, man, I've said to people before, like I could go 3-4 hours and we just keep going and having a conversation. So one, if you would like to come back at a later time, I would love to have you as a guest. I think you have a ton to offer and share. It's been a great conversation. Thank you, Dr. Khandicia Randolph.
Thank you.
Any final thoughts? What was that final statement you said you made in your book? Because I thought that was fantastic. Once we know better.
The saying is, when you know better, you do better. Now that we know better, we must do better. It's not, and this is the thing that I love about this manuscript and even about the program that I did. My doctoral program will end on this, and we'll let the rest of the world go. And if you and I want to keep talking, we can go for it. Sure. But yes, first of all, I openly accept your invitation to come back. You let me know when and where, and we can do this again. But like I said, so when you know better, you do better. In my doctoral program, we have a final project. It's not called a dissertation because it's technically not a dissertation, and it doesn't have to be a written manuscript. I chose a written manuscript because one of my strong suits is writing, and I can write myself out of something or I can write myself into things. I've done it before in life. I've written myself into a graduate program. I got in not because I had great grades or had been out of undergrad for a long time, but it was the essay that got me in. And I've written myself out of situations. So I said, you know what? If there's nothing else, I know how to write. I've written, I've written this whole time. So I can write, I can write it. We could have done, I had people who did, you can do a class development. So if you work with, I have a colleague who worked with an undergrad institution that I think now he's an adjunct at, and they had no leadership courses there. And so he, for his final project, developed a leadership course to begin leadership curriculum at his school. And so that's one of the things that I loved is that I didn't just get to, I got to choose my topic as long as it was related to leadership or work development. I got to choose, related, met the standards, made sense. My chair said, just by saying I got to choose, let's not simplify it. Because I know somebody out there watching it with the doctorate degree was like, yeah, it's not that easy. It's not. But for this conversation, I got to choose the topic, and I got to choose from 3 or 4 different mediums. Like you also could have done information that was presented like for training. You could have done training modules, but it would have had to have been enough information for a conference for like 2.5 or 3 days is what they told us. And I was like, no, that just sounds horrible, right? And so I chose the manuscript. But what I loved about choosing it is not just that I was passionate about it, but that I got to I'm going to read this. I don't usually do this, but I want you to hear this as the summation, because I think it'll drive us home, and then I really will stop. So it's from the acknowledgement section. It says, I would like to acknowledge hereby that without God, I am nothing. I am not a single solitary syllable, and not a single solitary syllable in this manuscript would be possible. I realize that I proudly stand as a beneficiary of the materialized dreams of an unconquerable people who refuse to stop forging ahead, stop fighting, and forego their rightful inheritance. I acknowledge that I am here by faith, the faith of my ancestors, the faith of those who love me, and the faith of those who never faltered in the belief that I could and propelled me to greatness. And this is the part that I really wanted you to hear, although the other part is probably more for me. I acknowledge that the intersectionality of my faith, academia, and passion is not an accident, but was divinely prescribed that I might do great things at the appointed time. Unashamedly, I acknowledge that I did not arrive at this moment alone, but that it is the complex composition that every chapter and season of my life and every person who has influenced and demanded nothing but extreme excellence from me. Finally, I acknowledge that the best is yet to come and that this is just the beginning.
I got the goosebumps. Girl, are you reading it? I love it.
So, we can end it
Just
on
the
there.
beginning.
The
Thank you so much.
No problem, none whatsoever.
Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Khandicia Randolph, thank you for joining me today. Thank you for your insight. Thank you for your time, and just really great conversation. I am so thankful to have had you here today.
I appreciate that. One more thing, because I realized neither of us said it. I get caught up. For those who are wanting to purchase the manuscript, you can purchase it on Amazon. It is available on Barnes & Noble. You can purchase it at Target.com. So if you just go to Target.com, you can find it there. There's also some other websites. Penguin Books, Thrift Books are 2 that immediately come to mind. If for some reason you don't want to do any of those ways, like if you type in the title of the book, The Black American Church, Leadership Dispensation and Challenges, it will show you all the places you can purchase it. If you put my name in Google, it'll actually show you various places.
Yep.
There's a couple of people on eBay who've bought some copies, so it is widely available.
Yes. And I would say definitely go pick up a copy, and I'm going to do the same. I thank you for coming on my show, and I look forward to talking to you again then also. And thank you for everybody tuning in. Thank you for everybody that gave us your time this afternoon. I appreciate you very much. Again, I do this every Wednesday afternoon at 12:05 Mountain, 2:05 Eastern. Make sure, throw some thumbs up on it. Make sure and like it, subscribe to the channel. And if you got something out of this episode, and I know you did, what a ton of excellent, just information to share the episode. That's one of the ways you can make the most impact and share with other people so that they can grow on their own leadership journey. Share the episode. So thank you so much, everybody. We will see you again back here next week, and I hope you have an absolutely fantastic day. Until then, be great.